and welcome to the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group weekly or bi-weekly meeting. It's October 13th, 2016. I'm Patrick Rogers, Senior Program Manager with Office 365. I'm joined by Vesa Juvonen. Also, I think your title is still Senior Program Manager, but now with OneDrive for Business and SharePoint Engineering. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Great. And so we got, I think, a really good meeting or call this week for everybody. A couple of good demos. We're going to talk about the 105 release, and then we got some great sort of a demo around kind of the concept of elevating permissions from client script. Obviously, we're not doing it directly in the browser, but sort of the patterns to follow to solve those same sorts of problems that we've solved in the past with elevated permissions. But first, a little bit about who we are and what we're doing. This is a special interest group, part of the larger SharePoint Patterns and Practices program, and we realized it's been almost probably a year now, I think we've been doing the special interest group calls, that we realized that the Patterns and Practices program had gotten sort of so large and had so many different areas of interest, it would be impossible to kind of cover them in sort of one call. There's just too much going on. So we started, this one was the first, and we've got now the PowerShell one and the CSOM one as well. So to give folks a way to get involved a little bit more deeply in their specific areas of interest. And so this call is focused around the SharePoint framework, and we talk about the latest developments in the SharePoint framework, give folks a chance to ask questions, and then as well really talk about what's coming up and demo some of the new functionality. So this is a great opportunity. We'll talk about this a little bit later as well. If you've written something in the SharePoint framework and would like a chance to show it off to the community, just get in touch with us and we'll be very happy to give you a slot to demo what you've done on this call. I think that really helps the community learn from each other and see the cool stuff folks are doing. I know I always learn a little bit when I see what different people have done with the stuff. So it's really cool to see what people come up with, because it's not always things I necessarily would have thought of myself. And the other part of this call is we do talk about the JavaScript core component and building that, evolving that in line with SharePoint Framework and how to benefit the SharePoint Framework, as well as those scenarios, so running it in Node or running it possibly in SharePoint but not using the SharePoint Framework, which is becoming less and less of a use case as the SharePoint Framework gets closer to GA, but is still an area we do want to give some attention to as well. Two great ways to get involved. Join us at the SharePoint community, which is now at techcommunity.microsoft.com, or use that aka.ms link. That'll take you to the right spot. And then also dev.office.com/SharePoint is sort of your landing page now for all things SharePoint development, whether it's the SharePoint framework or sort of CSOM stuff, all those sorts of things. That's kind of your one-stop shop for SharePoint development. So that's kind of what we're all about here in the JavaScript Specialist Group. So let's talk about what we're going to go over this week. We've got some from Vesa, the latest updates around SharePoint Framework. I think we're going to get a cool announcement on some updates here on that. We'll talk about the core component, topics from the community, as well as what's been happening. And we've got some demos around the 105 release that went out earlier this week. And then some community demos from myself and then from Waldeck, talking about the elevation of privileges concept and how that pattern is going to work with client-side development, because you don't want to expose those sorts of things on the client. But Waldeck will tell us all about that. And then we'll have time, of course, at the end for open discussion, questions, Q&A. You can, of course, ask your questions in the IM, and we'll do our best to answer those as we go. But we'll try and leave some time at the end for open discussion. Folks can come off mute and ask their questions directly to the team. So getting in the SharePoint framework, I'll hand this over to Vesa to give us some updates there.
Thank you. I'm going to take over as a presenter. So a few updates on this side. So let's see when it's actually loading so I can control that. So first of all, the new drop. It's been a while since we did a SharePoint Framework drop. It's been 3 or 4 weeks because we stabilized the situation for Ignite and we didn't want to actually release anything which would actually break stuff. So the new drop, number 5, will be out, I would estimate, today or tomorrow. And so it's going to come out relatively soon. So have a look on the social media communications, especially Twitter. It's either me, Office Dev, PnP, or Office Dev Twitter accounts, which we use for communications on all of this stuff. And I'm going to mute somebody from here. Thank you. So the drop number 5 is going to come out, and let's talk about that one in a second as well. I have an interesting animation here. So drop number 5 is coming out soon. SharePoint landing page, just to make sure that everybody is aware of this. Once again, I'm going to repeat this in every call. dev.office.com/SharePoint, and this contains tutorials and all future technical topics. So we will use this as the landing page for all of the documentation which is coming from this moment forward, and we're going to release more and more articles and documentation from engineering as well in this location in the future. If you are interested, you can actually contribute and write articles by yourself. And submit those as a pull request towards the SPDev docs repository. We do have guidance there where we explain what kind of or how to do that. Now, we do not, however, right now have, let's say, detailed instructions on what kind of content we are expecting, which is something what we have to get there as well, because this is the dev.office.com/SharePoint is the official product documentation, and that means that even though we absolutely appreciate whatever documentation what the community is doing, we have to make certain decisions around the areas where we concentrate. As an example, there's a great submission from a community right now around how to build responsive client-side web parts using. And now I'm kind of, come on, what's the responsive? The community? Responsive framework. Damn. Give me 1 second. So I'm not actually online. So I need to go to the pull request and have a look on. So how to use Bootstrap to actually make your client-side web part responsive. It's a great article, but this is a good example of an area which we cannot take it directly within the official product documentation, because our official recommendation is through the product is that people would be using the Office UI Fabric from a consistency perspective. Now, that does not mean that you would not be able to use Bootstrap. You can absolutely use Bootstrap within your client-side web parts, but we want to kind of keep this location as an official Microsoft recommended patterns and also the approaches how to do stuff. So we're working on that guidance sooner or later to be included in the documentation around what's going to be available or what we are willing to take as official documentation.
So
yeah.
If I may ask, so would it be an idea that before you start on your own to write docs, for example, to raise an issue on which we could all agree that yes, we need that topic and what you would include, and then once all of that is approved, you would go and write the docs, and then it will be merged, right? So Absolutely. That way there wouldn't be a waste of time and effort on everyone's side.
True. And in this particular case, I don't think it's a waste of time and effort. The information should absolutely get published, but using this personal blogs or whatever separate location.
Yeah.
But all with you, Waldek, on there. I think it's if people are aware of, and maybe we should actually update the documentation in a way that, hey, add a issue, your suggestion on a documentation. That's a great idea, actually. And then we can have a discussion on okay, that's fine, and please do write it. We'll submit in, and we'll get the documentation forward. That's a really good enhancement. I'm going to write that down somewhere in my OneNotes, and we're going to have a discussion with other people in Redmond from that. Good point. And then on the moving on things, because we want to make sure also that we have time for the demos. So there's multiple new samples and webcasts available. I do have a list of them actually coming up soon. Quickly on a SharePoint Framework, drop 5. So this is going to be released, like mentioned, pretty soon. So we're waiting for the server-side deployment to hit 100%. And after that, we're going to release the NPM packages and README files and all of that. One of the big things around the drop 5 is that we're moving into TypeScript 2, because TypeScript 2 is now live or in GA or RTM, whatever we want to call that. So all of the SharePoint Framework elements have been upgraded to the TypeScript 2. And the comment from the engineering side, or the guys who were actually doing this in practice, was that it was actually a surprisingly easy thing to do, which is which is a good thing. And we'll give some guidance on how to upgrade your existing web parts and how to do that as well. Office UI Fabric React has been upgraded to version 0.52. There's numerous improvements and changes in the base classes where we're kind of shuffling certain things around within the framework, so making sure that they're in the final locations, so they're in the right packages, and so we're not going to change them after the drop 5. Well, who knows? We're still in dev preview, but that's the objective. There was an issue in a Knockout template, so if you want to write your client-side web parts using Knockout, that there was an issues with that one on the drop 5, also previous drops, and those have been fixed, so that should be fine as well. And we are looking into also updating the existing samples to the drop 5 sooner or later. From a demo perspective, so from Nigel's comment, from a video, let's say, webcast perspective, we're not going to upgrade any of the existing webcasts. No, we will absolutely re-record tutorials, and let's actually have a list on those things. So the videos on the right side and webcasts, these are just the latest webcasts which we have available for SharePoint Framework, and all of these are with me and Waldek. Then there's the SharePoint Framework tutorials, and this is a 5-part series where we actually explain how to build a web part and all of that. And that's built, if I remember correctly, on top of drop 1. So it's about time that we actually upgrade those videos, and I'm going to work on that next week. So we're looking into having that updated set of videos then available within a few weeks or maybe end of next week. There's a lot of older videos and webcasts available as well, but from a resourcing perspective and scheduling perspective, it's just we cannot obviously go back and re-record all of these webcasts. That's not a sustainable model. So we're not going to do that. We're going to keep on upgrading our stuff to the latest webcast or latest version and then release a webcast. And maybe we should actually pinpoint always the version in the videos which we're using, which is good practice as well. On a sample side, so we do have, 12 individual samples already in the repo. So we're looking into expanding the set of samples still. Obviously, if your sample is something related on elements which are already touched within existing samples, we would appreciate that we'll update those rather than actually adding a new sample, because we don't want to have a competing samples, because that's not a sustainable model either. So as an example, if you're looking into new dimension on the Office graph, let's add that web part on the existing sample rather than implementing another Office graph integration sample in the repo. The new web parts here is the React Azure AD Web API, which is in the dev branch right now. So that's showing how to actually call a secured Azure AD Web API using client-side web part. There are certain, let's say, things to be aware of that, and we're looking into releasing an article around that one as well. There's the React SP elevated privileges, which Waldek is going to demonstrate later today, well, on this call within a few minutes. And then there's React to do basic, which is actually a really great web part coming from Jax. And that's kind of a simplified React web part, which is showing good practices on building React-based web parts. So it's split in a nice way to the components, all of the communication channels, and all of that has been thought through. So if you're kind of looking into slightly above the getting started client-side web parts, we would recommend you to have a look on the React to do basic, because that's really showing a great set of capabilities, how to handle when the web part is not configured, when it is configured, what if the lists are missing, and all of those capabilities is demonstrated there. So super valuable web part. That's now missing a really detailed README, but Jax is working on that one, so it should be out there latest tomorrow in the dev branch. So that's a really one of things which we would recommend you to have a look. One thing maybe to mention around the samples and the frameworks themselves. So In the SharePoint framework, you can use whatever JavaScript framework you want. So you can build stuff using Angular, jQuery, React, Ember. It doesn't really matter. We in Microsoft, we needed to make a decision at some point, and our chosen framework, how we build our stuff, our first-party web parts, is React. It doesn't mean that you need to do that, but that's the reason why there will be more React examples available also in a samples repo. And we are looking into releasing some of the first-party web parts as an open-source web parts as well. So all of those will be in React because we're investing heavily on the React platform. We're building the React-based components and controls as well, Office UI Fabric React components, so that you don't have to worry about the styling. You don't have to worry about building the presentation layer. You can concentrate more on just consuming. On Angular side, there's the NG UI Fabric, which is a great community effort doing something similar as well. So just to clarify why there's more React examples in here. Good. I think that's it from my side. So let's let Patrick to take over and move into what's new and latest on the PnP JavaScript core component side, which is a JavaScript library like whatever other third-party JavaScript libraries out there. And just to kind of clarify and kind of elaborate on that one. So you do not need to use PnP.js core component when you write stuff for the SharePoint framework, but you can. So it's a third-party, so it's a community-driven library which is making the development easy for you towards SharePoint. So, but Patrick, you're going to demo that today anyway, so just setting up the scene.
Yep. So as Vesa said, JS core component is something we've been working on now since we learned internally about what was coming with the SharePoint framework. The goal is to make it easier for developers, just in the same way that the CSOM core library does. It's not something you have to use, but it's something we hope you will use and hope you find helpful and useful in your development to help you maybe not have to memorize or look up all the different REST URLs and those sorts of things. So a couple different links there at the bottom. First, to the GitHub repo. Absolutely welcome everybody's contributions there and report issues there as well. With the 105 release that I'm going to talk through, we've updated the documentation around contributing and around and consuming and using the library as well. We got the NPM package, which is updated to 105, as I've said now a few times, just earlier this week. And the Gitter conversation, or Gitter, still have no idea what to call Gitter. The chat, Gitter chat thinger is a great place to get in touch with folks, ask questions, and everybody's fairly responsive on that as well to questions. So trying to help out as much as we can there. So jumping in, always want to say thank you. We've got two new contributors to talk about this week. Elio and Andrew both have contributed some cool fixes to the library. So those were rolled into the 105 release. So great stuff from both of those guys. So thank you to them, and thank you to all of our contributors. You make the project possible. So it's very much appreciated. As I've said in the past, please do double check the authors file, make sure I've got your name right, and do let us know if you'd like any additional information by your name. For example, a Twitter handle or a company name, something like that. Very happy and want to get you the recognition you should have and deserve in that authors file. And then we've said this on a few calls, if your company is allowing you time to contribute to the patterns and practices, whether it's the JS core or any of the patterns and practices projects, if you're actually contributing on company time and your company would like to have a logo sort of associated with the Patterns and Practices program, we're very happy to do that. There is a bit of a legal process now we found out we have to go through to do that, but it's not a huge deal, and very happy to work with you and get your logo, and that'll be as part of the monthly call. So getting you some great recognition on that call for you and your company for allowing you to contribute to the project. So thank you to everybody that has contributed and will contribute in the future. Very much appreciated by all of us in the Patterns and Practices program. So what's been happening? We did the 105 release this week. Big news there, and we're going to kind of talk through this on the demo, but we did move this as well to TypeScript 2.0, which changes both your development story and your consumption story a little bit. We've exported a bunch of the classes out of the library to help you, one, use the classes in your projects more easily, and two, helps with webpack and some of the other bundlers being able to bundle those things up, which then helps in with the SharePoint Framework story. And then we got some fixes in there, and I typed fixes twice, which I really meant to type enhancements, so pardon that. But so we've got some good enhancements and some fixes into the 105 there as well. We'll demo that today. Got a question about creating content types. Currently, you cannot create content types. That's not something that's super well documented in REST. In fact, not really documented at all. But if there's interest, we can certainly look at adding that. And so we'll try and take a look at that. Where to ask your SharePoint Framework questions. The tech community at Microsoft.com, as well as Stack Exchange are both great places to ask your SharePoint Framework questions. You're certainly welcome to ask them in our Gitter channel for the repo, and we'll do our best to help, but the actual product group is monitoring the tech community and Stack Exchange as well for your questions there, so it might be a slightly better place to ask those. And then we've got some stuff coming from Sergey around SharePoint Auth and enhancing that story in Node. So right now, for those of you that have been on past calls, we showed you using a client ID and a secret. He's got a library that he's actually got a pull request set up that I haven't had a chance to look at. It just came in, I think, this morning, or I just saw it this morning. So we'll have some auth improvements, and we're hoping to get him doing a demo on that on our next call on October 28th. I believe, and I apologize, I edited this in the browse 27th, October 27th, and we'll get a good demo on that. So looks like some of my edits didn't quite save. And then graph support, there's a question there. Not currently, we don't currently call or support calling the Microsoft Graph. It's a slightly different pattern than calling the SharePoint APIs. In terms of the auth needs and things like that, generally requires like adl.js. It's something we can look at. I have mixed feelings about it, whether that would sort of grow this library too much or maybe defocus it. Maybe that should be a separate library. Something I'm very happy to continue the conversation about in terms of graph support. And then issues are being actively reported, so thank you everybody who's reporting issues. I don't love to see issues, but I do love to see them getting reported, so it's something we can work on improving, looking at making those fixes. So we are working on each of those as they come in. We do appreciate all the feedback, and if anybody has some time and would like to help out with some of those issues that are being reported, that's very much appreciated as well. But do keep those issues coming in. I think that's great, and it's going to help us just improve the library for the benefit of everybody. So thank you to the folks that are using the library and then letting us know where they've run into problems or have ideas for enhancements. So great stuff from the community there. And then again, the links at the bottom to the Gitter and the community if you want to be sort of part of the conversation or have questions. Great way to get involved. So opportunities to contribute, these kind of remain unchanged. Write a webpart, demo it on this call. Would really love to see more from the community around demoing webparts. We've had some great demos the last few calls. Want to keep those going. Make sure we're all learning and contributing, to each other's growth in the SharePoint Framework space and the client development space. As Vesa said, and we've said before, you're not absolutely, of course, required to use the JS core library in your webparts. Would still love to see them demoed, but would love to see you use of the JS core library in the webparts as well. But certainly absolutely not a requirement to demo it on the call or to show it off. I think we can all learn from seeing everybody's approach to solving these problems. And again, still looking for help with testing, reporting the issues. Folks are doing that. That's fantastic. Love to see those issues coming in. Writing tests, still working through that. And then help styling the documentation. I did want to mention the docs were not updated as part of the 105 release. Type doc, which is the tool, I guess I'll say, we used, or the package to generate the documentation doesn't work with TypeScript 2.0 currently, and I spent more time than I'm happy to admit trying to make it work with 2.0. In fact, I was looking at trying to submit a pull request to those folks, but I couldn't quite get it going, and finally had actually other work to do. So we'll take a look back at that, but do want to still get some help styling and the UX for the documentation site. I think that's a great opportunity for someone in the community who's got much more style and experience around styling, certainly than I do, to have a big impact. So I'm the first to admit I am not a UX expert. So let's jump into the demos and see if I can present my desktop here. Yes. So if somebody could let me know when that shows up. Looks like I can see it.
It's there.
It's there? Great.
Yep.
Perfect. So what I wanted to show you guys is some of the new 105 features. So I mentioned we've gone to TypeScript 2.0, so that's a fairly big change. And if we look here, this is that testing project I've showed on a few calls, and you can actually download this. I've got a new blog post updating that sort of, in quotes, Node console app project. And so one thing you'll note right away is there's no typings folder. So in TypeScript 2.0, they've started supporting this idea of this NPM library called @type. So it's the @ symbol and then types. And then, so if we look in the PnP project here, you can see we've got our dependent types are now loaded as part of our project. So when you do an npm install for the SPPnP.js, it has the dependencies now on these @typings projects. And if we just take a look at the SharePoint one, you can see it's got the definition files in here as you would expect, or as you used to get through using typings, but this removes the need for using another tool, whether you wanted to use typings, whether you wanted to use TSD, or one of the, there's, again, open source, many options. It sort of removes that need, and so it makes the installing experience a little bit easier. And what this does, it actually solved, we had several different issues reported on some problems with typings and things like that. Pardon me. So folks that didn't have typings installed globally, the post-install step we had in 104 to install the typings was failing for folks, stuff like that. So this removes kind of that dependency on typings, as well as removes the dependency on installing a tool to set up all your typings for your project. And that also as well applies to the folks who are contributing. You no longer need to install the typings and things like that when using with 2.0 compiling or transpiling. Sorry, please don't jump on me for that. So that's a big change, but I think a really important change. It makes things a lot simpler and I think a lot easier, and solves actually some issues that were reported, which is always great. So no need for typings. That's great. That'll install those @typings. You can actually use that as well in your projects to pull in typings through the @type. So you can just do an npm install @types/ and then the name of the library. So @type/SharePoint, something like that. The next thing I wanted to show is this is something folks have been on the call have seen this pattern before, and I'm importing PnP, and this auth thing is just me running the PnP setup with my client ID in secret, so I didn't have to kind of broadcast that to the world. So you can sort of ignore that. And I've got my site URL, and as before, I'll just hit F5, and you can see I'm doing PnP SP web select. You've all seen this before, and nothing's really changed there. That pattern still works. So you get so no breaking changes there, nothing like that. And then we should see. So we see here we got our title back from the web log to the console. So that's kind of neat. But what I wanted to show you is one of the big enhancements we've done in the 105 release is I can now import web directly out of the top of the SPPnP.js. So this is now an exported class. And I can come in here and say let my W equal a new web, and I can give it a site URL. So this solves a problem that's come up a lot where folks wanted to open other webs, and this didn't necessarily, there were ways to do it. It didn't work really great or at all with Webpack or other bundlers. It worked within TypeScript, but not necessarily when you try and bundle it up. So this is a great improvement that this will now work with Webpack. So you can see I've just created a new web. You can give it any absolute URL to any web, and I'm just going to hit F5. And you're going to see the same thing work again, but with the advantage that I've been able to set, I'm using the same site URL, but you could, of course, use any other site URL here. It does need to be absolute, and you do need to, of course, have registered the add-in in that site. So the permissions and all that, of course, still apply and are no different. And if we look at, you can see now I've got my title, and everything works just as we would have expected. There. So very cool there. One of the other things that this actually lets you do now is you can do an import star as, say, PnPNS. So saying the PnP namespace. And so I could say pnpns.web, and that's still going to work as we expect. But you could also do pnp.ns and see all the classes we're exporting on IntelliSense here. So one of the big advantages with this is you'll be able to more easily access all the internals of our library. You'll be able to type, strongly type your input parameters to methods. So things that take certain parameters that were typed, you can now type those. You'll also be able to strongly type, for example, here's list update result. So we can actually strongly type our results coming back out of list update. The other thing it allows you to do is much more easily, and you can do this either way. So we could say pnpns.logger.log, and I can log things. And if I wanted to let my listener equals pnpns.console listener, and I would do a new on that. That's a class, so new console listener. And I can now much more easily, as an example, subscribe my listener to the logger, and then I can do in here, I can log my message, and I'm actually going to use the write, which takes just a string there on the logger. And if I were to run this, I'm now going to get the exact same result, but instead of writing to the console directly, I'm writing to my logger, and my logger is using the console listener. And I go back to my debug console. Uh-oh. And my demo has not worked, which is always good when you're doing a demo. Let me try this one more time. Interesting, interesting. Oh, sorry. I know why it's not running, because I forgot to apply the proper log level. So we were at below a log level. So I'll just run this now. Apologies for that. I didn't look at my notes quite closely enough. And so if you're below the log level, like most logging things, it's not actually going to log that. So it does that. You can set the log level on the logger, but if we look now at the console, you'll see we've gotten written out to the console our log message through the logger. And you can subscribe multiple loggers, of course. So that's just one example of how it's easier now to export these things. And one thing I can do as well is I can grab these classes directly from the, so I don't need to get the whole namespace if I know what I'm trying to export. So this is hopefully a great enhancement for folks that's going to let things work a little bit easier, make it a lot easier to interact with the library and interact with the different classes. So things like that, and we'll just hit F5 and we'll see that this approach also works as well. So showing the different ways of importing things out of the library. Hopefully we've simplified that a lot, made it a lot easier. And the other big advantage is this now works with Webpack and with bundling. So wanted to take a quick look at what does that mean. And so I'm going to leave this as is. I'm going to comment out our auth because we don't do the auth within the browser. And I want to show you there's two commands in here. In that, if you go look at the blog post and look at the sample, download that sample add-in, one of the things you can do is a gulp serve, and this is very much like the SharePoint framework gulp serve. And I did want to touch on, some folks have asked why bother with this, why not just use the SharePoint framework directly? It's an absolutely great question. You absolutely should be using the SharePoint framework for your client-side development and deploying things that way. I did this, one, as a simplified example of using Webpack and sort of some of the very basic features of Webpack, and two, as a way, if you just want to play with the library and learn about the JS core library itself directly without necessarily worrying about all the SharePoint framework plumbing, and you're just sort of curious about what's in the library, this gives you a way to kind of play with the library and try things out. But for your production, definitely the way of the future and the way I would recommend and direct people is the SharePoint framework for your client-side development and using the SharePoint framework web parts. But did want to show you, so I've now used this gulp serve, which is using the Webpack server. You can see we've built up all our files. And if I go to the browser, one thing I wanted to show you is in Google Chrome, we get some questions still about this, that can I load unsafe scripts? And the answer is yes, I can. So I've loaded those unsafe scripts now, and if we hit F12 and we look at the console, we should see here is our logged message there on the console. This message can't go away for whatever reason, but so here's our message, and we log that to the console. And so I've also set up, wanted to show another feature of Webpack. I've got a div in there in the, here we go, on that page. And so I wanted to show two features here. I've got a little div I added. It's just in a script editor webpart. So if I save that, Webpack will invalidate because it sees the files have changed. We're watching those files. It's going to bundle that back up. I can refresh the page and see my changes. So a very simple change, but again, very similar, if not the same, functionality is in the SharePoint framework, but just a way to play with the JavaScript core library directly outside of the SharePoint framework. If you want to and looking to do something like that. So it's a great way to use that stuff in the browser and just to try things out. But for your production, for your kind of bigger development, absolutely SharePoint framework, React, or Knockout, or any of the frameworks is absolutely the way to go for sort of the real, quote-unquote, real projects, real sort of stuff to do. And the last thing I wanted to show is something that I can do now, and this is again in that sample project, you download it, but I can do a gulp bundle, and I get some linting errors, so that's great. But what we've got now in the dist is we've actually got a minified version of our file. So this is the entire Webpack version, and you might be asking yourself, well, big deal, we've seen Webpack work. What's really cool about this is now working with the 105 release and doing allowing you to export these classes directly and use the web class directly, which is something that prior to 105 would fail and would not work. So this is a great improvement for those folks using Webpack or those folks using the SharePoint framework and wanting to use 105 wanting to use the JS core with the SharePoint framework. This is a great enhancement to let these things be bundled up correctly and work in the way you would expect, for things to work with Webpack. So I think a great enhancement there. Did want to touch on one other thing and just mention it out loud. I went through and I removed a lot of the selectable properties from a bunch of classes. I mentioned this in the release notes blog post, but wanted to talk about that a little bit. The reason I did that was simply to save space. We gained 11K in the minified package, which is kind of a lot, just for removing these selectable properties. And what I mean by selectable properties is stuff you can just use .select on. So instead of having, for instance, on file, we used to have an explicit name property where you could say .file.name.get and get just the name back. If you're doing that in your code, the way to now do that is .file.select and get that information back. So really excited to gain that space, but did want to mention it out loud for those folks who might want to do those sorts of things. And a couple other mentions. So we got some great stuff in the pipeline on webhooks, and then as I mentioned before, improvements in the auth story within Node. So looking at making those improvements to come down the pipe. So we might get a 106 release here in a couple weeks. We'll see, maybe before the next call. So we'll have to see how that goes. So use the library, upgrade to 105. There are some changes you have to make in your project. Those are outlined in the two blog posts around using TypeScript 2.0, some of the differences in how your projects are going to build and things like that. And if you find issues, of course, report those. So I'll hand this over now to Waldeck, if you're ready to check that stuff out. Patrick, can you share the sample? The sample is on the blog post. Let me grab a link to that, so you can download it directly from the sort of updated console app discussion here. So hopefully you can grab that and check that out, and then you should be able to do that. And so it looks like Waldeck is presenting. You all set, Waldeck?
Yeah, I am. So can you see my screen and hear my voice?
I sure can.
Yep.
Take it away.
Awesome. So as you've heard, and you might have experienced yourself already, when you build client-side webparts, there's no ability to run elevations, right? Because you run in browser and you run inside the context of the current user. So there is no way for you to elevate privileges and get access to resources that you are not allowed to access by yourself. Nevertheless, there might be still requirements that require you actually to be able to do that. So imagine that you would have a web part that allows you to indirectly write to a list that you cannot access. So like a poll or request for HR. So you would only be able to write a request, but you wouldn't be able to access that list. And there are ways to achieve that in the SharePoint Framework's client-side web parts in a way a bit different than in the past. So let me show you how you can do that. So here on the page, you see a web part that, as you can see, we can use to create an item. So let's create a new item. Let's call it JSIG. Let's create item. The web part in it will now post to a list, and if we go to list, the item is here. So that's our list. Let me not do that. Let me refresh the page. And here we see our item. So far, no big deal, right? However, what you see here is we are here in SharePoint Online, but the workbench is on my local host. And if you've worked with SharePoint Framework client-side web parts a bit, you know that you cannot do that cross-domain call client-side, right? So that's one. And also, if that web part was put on a page and I would log in to the site using an account that cannot access a list, I would still be able to create the item. So the way this works is that web part uses a custom web API that's registered as a SharePoint add-in that has app-only write permissions to this list. Right? So if we look at the code, let me jump to the code. Here we have the web part, and here here we have the API that we call from inside the web part. So let's zoom in on the code. It's built in React, so I hope that you can follow that. And what we see here is that we have the create item function that's attached to button on the web part. And whenever that is clicked, we issue a post request to our custom build web API at this URL, and we issue a post request and we send along the title that we typed in the input box. The API on its part, if we go to that, is a C# web API API. Let me close that. So here what you see is that we use the PnP core library to get a app-only auth token based on the site URL, client ID, client secret. And based on that, we access the list and we create new item in it with title that we put inside the web part. So that's one way you can go around that. And if we go back to our list, sorry for that, wrong browser. If we look at the item, let me zoom that in a bit. If we view the item here, we can see that this item has been created by the PnP Elevation API. So that means that it has not been created by the user logged into the page, but it's actually created by the add-in that we use inside the API. And we have an article that explains to you step by step, like how do you go around creating that, how do you register that API in your site, how do you grant that permissions. So all of that will be available to you to check how it works. But the basic idea is that from inside the web part, with credentials that you have no permissions to access a resource. But then if you would have an API that does that using a app-only access or app-only token, then you can reach out from your app part to that API and have that API performs these operations on your behalf. So with that, if there are no other questions, I will
Yeah, so Waldek, I'm going to just slightly elaborate because this is such a classic scenario, but I would say that the really, really simplistic business scenario is something like, hey, I want to have a feedback web part. I want to have a feedback web part on the front page of my intranet where people can go and submit, let's say, how they feel and what's the feedback and whatever. To be able, in SharePoint, to be able to people to actually write to a list, these people actually need to have a read permissions to the list as well. And that would then mean that the person, yes, he can write to the list using the web part, but he would actually be able to read also the other people's feedback. And that's not really what we typically want, so we need to elevate. Really classic scenario from SharePoint 2007, 2010, 2013, and so on. And this is really like Waldek explains and showed. This is the classic scenario on how we then call a web API, which is then using the app-only access to actually for the elevated operations. So the model is exactly the same as in adding model. Or adding model implementations, but we just do it now within the client-side web parts. And this is one of the samples which we no doubt wanted to actually create because there's a lot of questions around the elevation from the community sooner or later. So we have this one available. The immediate kind of a follow-up question would be that, hey, okay, but what if somebody is just calling that web API, is it secured? What about the traffic between the client-side web part and that web API which is hosted in Azure? And the answer is right now with this sample, we knowingly make a decision that we didn't want to show how it can be secured, but it can be secured using the Azure AD implicit flow. So we'll work on a sample, or Waldek is actually already, there is a sample around that one as well, which is actually then showing how would you secure that web API where the client-side web part is called. Just to kind of elaborate more on what we were showing.
Yep, cool.
Yeah, Yeah, that's great. And I think the other point to make is while you're elevating permissions, you're only elevating what you're providing, right? So it's not an open elevation of something that you're creating holes in the security of the site. It's very specific, in this case, adding a list item. You can imagine other scenarios, but this isn't wide open anything to your site. And you can, of course, tailor the permissions of that web API, in quotes, add-in to exactly what you need as well. So you're not over permissioning anything in the chain.
Yes, and I guess that what you say is actually an excellent point, right? Because you don't need to have like either nothing or all approach. What you could do is you could have separate add-in with different permissions registered with each API. So even with each operations. So with that, you can really tightly seal down all the access, and if one of them would breach, they would only breach that one API and not all of them. So you would have, let's say, the God mode access to your tenant.
True. And I have to say one more example since we're talking, and this is an awesome discussion because personally I think this is the holy grail of enterprise development. How do I actually call an external API from the client-side webpart? And if we think about the web API, what Waldek showed, can you actually, Waldek, go to the code? The most simplistic way to secure this web API, which isn't around security, it's around limiting the access of calling the web API, is actually add a course limitations on the web API side. So you could actually add a course limitation for the production tenant, which means that if the call is coming from the production tenant, it's fine. If it tries to come from anywhere else, we would not execute that. There's way to still go around that as well, but still, the most simplistic way of getting this slightly more secure than right now.
Yep.
Good. I think we're heading to the Q&A section of the...
Yep, go back here to the...
Unless there's additional questions around the demos, or just as well.
So great demo, Waldek. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you myself for a demo as well.
Great work, Patrick.
Yeah. So now we got plenty of time for Q&A from folks. If there's any kind of open questions on anything you've seen today, SharePoint Framework, core library, or client-side development in general. And while we're kind of waiting for folks to type their questions or come off mute, I did have one editorial note I forgot to mention earlier. Did want to apologize. The video didn't come through from our recording at Ignite, which is a huge bummer for me personally because I thought that was a fun call. So sorry about that. Frankly, not sure because we had video for like the first 5 seconds and then it stopped recording. So apologies there. No video, but you can get all the audio as well. So questions. What was the framework or idea for securing the web API? So Waldek's answering that. Azure Active Directory is great. At that point, it really is up to, as well, you, the developer. So Azure Active Directory is a great obvious choice, and there's other choices if you have some type of custom auth at your enterprise or at a customer. There's ways to do that, of course. At that point, it's just an MVC application. So I've talked to some people lately about risks associated with implicit flow. It seems to me that the risk can be mitigated by how the tokens are handled by the client. For example, if you put the token in a cookie, other scripts in the user agent could access and use it. Thoughts on best practices? So I don't know if Vesa or Waldek want to tackle that one?
Sure, yeah. So I guess the problem that you say is valid one, and there is no way for you to secure them because these tokens are actually available to any element on a page. So imagine that you would have two webparts on a page. If one of them would request an access token, at that point, currently the way 8.0 works, or actually auth implicit flow works, is that every element on that page has access to that token, and there is no way for you to work around it. So in a way, it's a high trust scenario where you really have to know what web parts you put on a page, where they come from, and what they do.
Yeah, and when you think of it, when we're installing client-side web parts, that is a tenant-level operation. And when you're doing that, we are clearly pointing out that, by the way, these are full trust web parts. So it's absolutely true. If we start accessing and storing those tokens, there would be a malicious client-side web part on the page, it could actually access that information. But why would you install that web part on your tenant? So it's the same as kind of a scenario as with farm solutions back in the 2007 or in on-premises in general. People don't consider that, but farm solutions have full access on anything within that farm. So they can actually access all of the confidential information within the farm. So it's no doubt a good practice to actually review the code, what we're going to install on the farm. So full trust means full trust. That should be kind of a given. But it's absolutely true. And in the articles, we are pinpointing where these concerns as well. So people are aware of this as well.
Yes, and access tokens are not put in cookies. No. So by default, they are stored depending on how you set ADAL. They're either stored in the session storage or local storage.
Great, thanks guys. Any other questions from anybody in the audience? In that case, I don't see anybody typing, so I'll just say thank you to Waldeck for another great demo. Thanks to Vesa for some great updates around SharePoint Framework. And thanks to all of you for joining the call and participating. Look forward to talking to you guys shortly. Remember, our next meeting will be October 27th. We're going bi-weekly, so October 27th is the next meeting. And we've already got, hopefully, a great demo from Sergey lined up there. And we'll look to have a second demo there from somebody from the community as well. So if you write a web part or interested in doing a demo, please just get in touch. Would love to feature you on the call. So thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll be talking soon. Take care.
Bye.